Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Downtown Now, Global Trends for Downtowns. We'd like to remind you to please feel free to use the chat features to interact with one another and ask any questions during the presentation, and we will try to answer them later. Now I will turn it over to Executive Vice President, Business Development, Michael Deemer.
Hey, thank you, Lauren, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. For those of you who may be new to the webinar or not familiar with Downtown Cleveland Alliance, I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are and what we do. We're the only nonprofit organization dedicated solely to making downtown Cleveland the region's most compelling place to live and visit. We're a place-based development organization that represents property owners, residents, businesses of all sizes, as well as civic partners in downtown Cleveland. Over the last 15 years, we've concentrated on building a clean, safe, welcoming, and pedestrian-friendly place that attracts additional investment. The kind of place where residents and office workers can walk to meet their daily needs, where local retailers and restaurateurs animate the streets, and where people are proud to build a life for themselves and their families. We can't do this work without the generous support of individuals, small businesses, corporate partners, and foundations. And downtown Cleveland needs your support now more than ever. And in response to an outpouring of requests for how folks can help, Downtown Cleveland Alliance has launched the Unite Cle Fund. Donations to this fund help support small downtown businesses, aid our Voices of Cle public mural program, expand our Seeds workforce readiness program, which provides jobs and job training for people who are homeless, and sustains our Downtown Cleveland Homeless Fund, which helps connect individuals who are homeless with shelter and needed services. As Lauren mentioned, we've been doing this weekly webinar for 20 weeks now, and it's a pleasure to do every week. We've been chronicling the impact of COVID-19, talking about the challenges that all downtowns are facing in light of the pandemic, as well as protest in support of greater racial equity and inclusion. And today, we're going to talk about all of those things, and we have really the perfect guest to do it, and a great friend of Downtown Cleveland Alliance. Brad Segal is the president of Progressive Urban Management Associates based in Denver. Brad is a longtime friend of Downtown Cleveland Alliance. He was actually one of the people who was instrumental in helping us set up and found the organization 15 years ago. And then we brought him back a few times over the years that help us keep it going. So Brad knows us very well. We know him well, and he's going to be a terrific voice today. And one of the things that he's done for us over the years is produce a report rooted in a strategy that Progressive Urban Management Associates created a few years ago, documenting the global trends impacting downtowns. And he's very conveniently updated this year's Global Trends Report to highlight what's happening in light of the pandemic. So Brad, really happy to have you here. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Great, thanks Michael, and thank you everyone in Cleveland. And just a quick reminder, if for those on the Zoom part of this, to make sure you mute your microphones, because we're getting a little bit of feedback out there somewhere. Thanks again for the introduction, and it is a pleasure to be back with you in Cleveland, if not in person, on screen. As Michael mentioned, I've had opportunities to work with the Downtown Cleveland Alliance and in Cleveland several times over the last 15 years or so now. So it's been a delight to watch the evolution of the city. And it truly is one of my favorite cities. I really do enjoy going to Cleveland and learning about the different aspects of the city. Today, I am going to share with you, as Michael mentioned, and this should all be on your screens now. I'm going to share with you not only the body of research that we've done on different trends, but I'm going to talk about the impacts from the pandemic on these trends and how these influences are converging to provide not only challenges, but also opportunities for our downtowns and for downtown Cleveland. So I'll start, I'll just give you a little bit of background on this trends report. What I'm a real estate economist and a planner, and our firm, that's what we do. We do economic analysis and planning in cities all over the country, mostly downtown markets. And back in 2007, about 13 years ago, our job was to chart the future of our city, of Denver, for the next 20 years. So to do that, we looked at different demographic, lifestyle, and competitive trends that were shaping cities, analyzed that, and then brought it back home. And we learned not only did it inform our projections and our future, but we also learned that this body of research really applied everywhere we went. So what's happened is we've been updating this frequently since 2007. There have been 5 iterations now of this global trends report. And on this slide, what you'll notice is about half of the trends that we started with 13 years ago are still the trends we track. So we've been changing it up. As the world changes, we look at different trends and influences on cities. Our last trends report, we completed it fourth quarter of last year. And essentially what we found and what we've been finding throughout this duration is really for the past 15 years, a variety of converging trends have been coming together to benefit downtowns, including downtown Cleveland. So we just updated this body of work because our world all went upside down back in March. And one of the big questions of the pandemic is this really a game changer? Are we going to be different? Or is there something else going on here? And we don't necessarily have all the precise answers. All of this are sort of our best educated guesses. But our initial conclusion on COVID-19 is that the pandemic, while it's a colossal disruption, a disruption really of our lifetime, it's more of an accelerator than a game changer. It's really accelerating a lot of trends that were already in place. So I'm going to talk about these accelerating trends and what we expect their impact will be on downtowns and downtown Cleveland specifically. So as an accelerator, there have also been a couple other huge disruptions, if you will, that we've been dealing with over the last several months. And the protests for racial justice, we view that as acceleration of another pre-existing trend. So the trend towards social equity was starting, really reacting to the extreme income inequality in this country. And it's both, has a couple dimensions here, income inequality and also racial justice. So again, a trend that is accelerating, and I'll talk much more about that moving forward. And then the third big disruption, this economic shock, the highest unemployment since the Great Depression. And I think a big question on everybody's mind is how long is this going to go on? You'll find that we are maybe a little bit more optimistic than most. We do think the next 6, 9, 12 months as we continue to ebb and flow through the pandemic will be very challenging. But once we have confidence in the health situation, we do see the recovery coming pretty quickly and very quickly in downtown areas. So I'll take the rest of the presentations to sort of talk about why we think that may be the case. So it goes back to these background trends, these underlying trends that we've been monitoring for the last 15 years. And demographics are a big part of this. We're making one big assumption on demographics, and this is an assertion that the pandemic is affecting different generations in different ways, and younger generations in particular. Those under 40, we think will return to their pre-pandemic preferences and behaviors very quickly. They're experiencing less personal health risk. You've actually seen some of this over the past summer. So a lot of the outbreaks that popped up throughout the country, and even now, were triggered by younger populations that were returning to past behaviors. Once the health situation stabilizes, we think that will accelerate. And there could be a surge in demand for entertainment, dining, services, a lot of the businesses that have really been hurt hard by this situation. Also the racial justice protests, on the job training, if you will, for young people, for millennials and Gen Z, getting civically involved, and activism that we think will continue with younger generations. This again is an acceleration of a trend that pre-existed. These generations were predisposed to activism prior to the pandemic, but we see that accelerating moving forward. Also on demographics, older generations being more cautious. So I'm one of these people on the slide. I'm not exactly one of those people on the slide, but I'm a baby boomer. And we'll be back on the beach one of these days, but we are more cautious. We're more impacted by the day-to-day health risks. And if we're not worried about us, we're worried about elderly parents or in-laws. For example, I got in-laws in their 80s and 90s, and I don't want to be the one that brings COVID to them. So older people are being more cautious in this, and we do think boomers are going to be probably the last to resume their habits out of this. And then right in the middle is always Gen X, those 40 to 55. We actually see the pandemic accelerating a trend for Gen X to move up into positions of leadership in cities all over the country. We were already seeing this pre-pandemic. We're thinking that the pandemic may actually induce some boomers to think about retirement maybe a little earlier than they thought otherwise. Lifestyles, other sets of trends, and this gets into the economic foundations of downtown Cleveland. So retail. The pandemic to us accelerates a trend where there were already struggling types of retail that are now being pressed too far. So outdated department stores, legacy stores, outdated shopping malls. This is accelerating a trend and their likely demise. Online shopping obviously has gone up, but I read a statistic recently that it was about 10% pre-pandemic, and even now it's about 20%. It isn't, you would think, with some of our habits that it'd be much higher. So we do think that a lot of the retail that powers a downtown will resume, will return, will regenerate. There will continue to be preferences for local, authentic, emotional connections to products. These younger demographics that are more likely to return to the marketplace quicker, they'll be interested in community-focused retail and a premium on social impact from goods and services. And also for downtown Cleveland, really expect a surge in entrepreneurship as we recover from the pandemic. We've seen this in all past recessions, but we think we may see this even more this time around just because of the nature of the businesses that have been challenged this time around. So in terms of downtown Cleveland, storefront economy becomes critical moving forward. And how can we help businesses survive this? And how can we also prepare for re-tenanting as we get to the other side of the pandemic and we see new business opportunities coming from all corners of the community? Nature of work, office. I know this is top of mind probably for most everybody on this webinar. And this is probably one of the biggest question marks. We don't really have a definitive answer on this. We do think the work week will fundamentally change, but the role of the office will not. So the 5-day-a-week in the office work week, probably less common, certainly, than it was before. But again, here we have acceleration of a pre-existing trend. Prior to the pandemic, there was a movement toward more flexibility. We do see 3-4-day work weeks. We also see the office remaining central to most of our businesses moving forward. So if you have a business that requires teamwork or it's creative, also for younger people, if you're entering a firm or if you're mid-management, you want to advance in a firm, we don't know how you do that on a screen long-term. So we think offices continue. There is likely to be softness, certainly, in the recovery office market. So whereas we think in total, we're looking about an 18-month to 3-year recovery cycle, offices may be looking at an 18-month to 5-year cycle, but this is not the death of the office. Housing, are we going to continue to see the growth of housing in downtown? And that's been remarkable in downtown Cleveland, just watching downtown grow as a neighborhood just in the 15 years that I've been popping in and out of your city. So yes, we still see a pipeline of demand for downtown housing. We do think that's going to be driven primarily by younger demographics, so those under 40. Affordability is going to be critical, certainly in the recovery period. So while we see younger people moving back downtown, it is younger people that are most impacted by the economic shock right now and are losing income and wealth. So leases, um, innovative ways to repopulate any vacancies that you may have in apartments and housing downtown. Affordability will be critical. Power of place. So a lot of cities, including Cleveland, are using this time to experiment with how we use the public realm. So in some communities, there's partial or full street closures. We're using sidewalks more aggressively for outdoor dining, the outdoor downtown. And at time, this is now a time, take some risks, do some stuff you maybe have been thinking about for years, but never really had the opportunity to do it. And then keep what sticks. And then certainly in Cleveland and to a degree in my hometown in Denver, we're all a little concerned about the winter because we're having some success with outdoor downtown during the summer and into the fall. I think it's a challenge for us to how do we get our communities to embrace winter a little bit more. Certainly in places like Norway or Canada, they don't necessarily sit inside for 6 months. So some of these outdoor innovations, let's see if some of these also stick during the winter months, and then permanently on the other side of the pandemic, how do we make the successful ones stick? Some other lifestyle trends that we've been tracking, transit, real concern, will transit bounce back? Quick answer for us is yes. However, transit ridership was declining prior to the pandemic. And this was in part because of the imperative to integrate with other forms of mobility. So how particularly younger people get around these days is on a phone. They're not worried so much about whether they end up on a bus or in an Uber or on a bike, but it's all got to be integrated and accessible through technology and through a phone. And that's where we saw success with some of the transit agencies that were retaining ridership. It was actually integrating with other forms of mobility. Public health, there certainly will be greater considerations in the design of both public and private space and public health coming out of this. And then higher education, four-year colleges were already, prior to the pandemic, projecting a decrease in enrollment. We do think that will continue, and four-year colleges are going to be more hard-pressed to retain the enrollments that they had prior. It also creates openings for alternatives to four-year colleges. So community colleges, coding schools, vocational schools, we think we'll see increased demand in those areas. Then lastly, last set of trends, which we labeled just in the 2020 report, we labeled disruption. But the trend toward social equity, as I mentioned earlier, this was pre-existing prior to the pandemic. The racial justice protests are a manifestation of that pre-existing trend. We also see the civic activism going beyond racial justice to education, wages, housing. Again, the on-the-job training that this younger generation is getting now. Expect that to continue. And we also see, and we view Cleveland as a leader, as a city that offers opportunity, that this is going to be critical moving forward. And does downtown have a meaningful role to advance solutions, partnering with city, partnering with the foundations on different solutions to create a more equitable city and a city where there's opportunity. Climate change. We do see activism in the climate change area accelerating after the pandemic. It's really given a lot of places a glimpse of what a reduced carbon world looks like. On the slide, that's New Delhi, India, and on the right image, the image on the right is what their skies have looked like for decades. On the left, for about a month when they shut down, they actually had blue sky for the first time in a long time. We even witnessed that here in Colorado on the Front Range. Our skies were as clear as they've been in 30, 40 years back in March and April. So given this sort of glimpse of what this looks like, does this accelerate climate change activism? We think it does. And then last one, we can debate this long, and it's very timely. My understanding is Cleveland is hosting the first presidential debate next week. Good luck with that. We do think that this pandemic may be accelerating a political realignment in the United States. Again, there was movement toward this direction prior, but the pandemic maybe accelerating it. In the United States, what a realignment is really a shift between two dominant philosophies, the greater good, if you will, and individual prosperity. And if you think back in history, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, that's an example of greater good. Ronald Reagan, probably the best recent example of individual prosperity. So we think the pendulum may be shifting back toward the greater good, and you may see a start for that. It's not going to transform overnight, but we see a start for that in 2020, pushed along by the pandemic. So our conclusions, and notice 2021, this is where we think we'll be this time next year when we're talking about downtown. And this is where we were way back in February, before all this crazy stuff started. We do think that the background trends remain favorable for vibrant downtowns, cities that welcome diversity, that welcome young, skilled employees, millennials, Gen Z talent will continue to thrive. Opportunity cities. This was a trend that was in place prior to the pandemic, and I don't consider Cleveland necessarily a second-tier city, but I do consider Cleveland as an affordable alternative to some of the pricier markets on the East Coast, perhaps the West Coast. And you have a competitive advantage coming out of this, having greater affordability and offering a high quality of life. The fourth bullet there is about the public realm and these innovations that we're able to make right now in terms of our streets, our public areas, and making sure some of those stick. Innovation and investment has been reliant on local and regional initiative. If there is a federal realignment, there may be more support for cities moving forward. And then lastly, economic opportunity and racial justice, just key qualities for any city that wants to prosper and wants to recover quickly coming out of the pandemic. So with that, Michael, that's where we are with our trends and our best guess of where we are with the pandemic.
Well, Brad, I really appreciate that overview. And, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about the report in your presentation is it's very challenging these days to look past the next few days or weeks to a broader horizon. So I think that's a helpful exercise for all of us to go through. I guess the first question that comes to mind, and I suspect you're getting a lot of this these days, as freeing as it is to look at the longer horizon and feel like, okay, there's life on the other side. We've got some of our urban place management experts telling us we're going to get there. The inevitable question is, how are we going to get there? How do we get from where we are to the other side? And I wondered if you could share a little bit about as you're talking to downtowns across the country and your home of Denver, sort of what sorts of strategies when it comes to office promoting living and supporting storefronts you're seeing downtowns engage in.
Yeah, it's a good question. And without a doubt, the next 6, 9, 12 months continue to be challenging. We do think, the root of really getting into recovery is controlling the virus. And we just don't see that coming in the next 6, 9, 12 months. We see this ebb and flow and different outbreaks popping up. Having said that, we do see a number of things that are positive. Certainly this whole outdoor environment has really helped. And I think there's a lot of positive aspects of an outdoor downtown. When we're talking about our favorite cities around the world, almost invariably people will talk about European cities that have an active cafe culture and an outdoor orientation. I think we're getting a taste of that now. We do see a lot of connections between residents and businesses within downtown. So if you've got enough critical mass of residents, you do in Cleveland, you've got, what, about 15, 20,000 people living downtown now. So that connection between the residents and the businesses that they really cherish. we're seeing that in neighborhoods everywhere, and downtown really is a neighborhood. So to the extent that residents can continue to support their favorite restaurants, their favorite outlet, through takeout or through whatever they're comfortable doing. We're also encouraging businesses to do that as well, because as much as we want people back in offices, it's a little hit or miss. Some people are coming back to offices quicker than others, but we do think office businesses could seek out the retail and restaurant businesses that pre-COVID they supported, continue to support them. Some of this may be credit for the future, so providing some sort of credit now for what happens next. And I think just a number of sort of small interventions on a variety of levels that we're seeing in cities. So we did see a fair amount of activity in downtown markets through the summer. And if we can find innovative ways to continue that. The last thing I'll say is in most cities we're working in, and I assume this is true in Cleveland, the residential market has remained pretty strong. Mm-hmm. So we are seeing, despite the job loss and the pain of many, we are seeing most downtown markets retaining occupancies on the residential market. And with ownership financing the way it is right now, actually sales in many markets has picked up on the residential side.
Well, part of our context here in downtown Cleveland is we are approaching 20,000 residents. And in fact, at the start of the year, we projected we'd hit 20,000 residents this year. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we've got, as we speak, between now and the end of the year, probably 1,000 new apartment units hitting the market. And one of the things we knew, pedestrian infrastructure, bike infrastructure, more outdoor amenities, kind of doubling down on all those placemaking strategies. And I wonder if you could expound on that a little bit, because I think one of the things that we found here is that even over the course of the pandemic, it remains a fairly auto-centric city and region, and it's been a little bit challenging to take full advantage of some of the opportunities for, again, outdoor placemaking, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure in the way that we've seen some other cities do it. So I wonder if you could just kind of elaborate on, how that's been helpful in other places and why you see it as so important.
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to what's going on in Cleveland, obviously, but I will say a lot of cities have been very aggressive, just trying stuff, just taking some risks, and closing streets with low traffic volumes. And you can do this with temporary barriers. We're not talking about anything permanent right now. Looking inward within downtown and also adjacent neighborhoods. How do we connect downtown to adjacent neighborhoods, and really looking on that scale? This doesn't need to be a citywide scale. So are there some key streets that would be good pilots? Start with 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. Just pilot some shared streets. That's one thing in Denver, actually, it's been very successful here, is the notion of shared street. We're not closing a street, but our city has put essentially barriers in each intersection that forces the traffic to slow down. And they've designated these as shared streets. And the vehicles know, 1, they have to slow down, and 2, with the signage and the resulting buzz of this designation, you've got streets that have become safe for walking, biking, and cars, all modes. You can still park on them. You can still drive down on them. But because of these barriers at the different intersections, it takes the speed entirely out of the situation. Other areas where you have 1-block commercial areas or 2-block commercial areas, now is an outstanding time, if you haven't already. Again, you're running out of time, we're getting into fall, but to close a block or 2, you don't have to close a mile of street in order for there to be a tangible difference. Um, Also, those, and this may be less applicable to downtown, but any businesses that have on-site parking, the ability to reuse on-site parking in innovative ways. Again, using Denver as an example, we've 400 variances have been granted to businesses all over this city to use either their own parking lot or public space in front of their businesses. And again, the city responded very quickly to that. We have been working remotely with several communities, designing alley closures. And I know in my recollection is Cleveland, you have a really strong alley network. And these alleys are another place where restaurants and other businesses can potentially expand, or those become pedestrian places, and you manage the deliveries. Maybe the deliveries are restricted to certain hours, and then manage the alley. And you don't have to do much more than keep it clean, which you can with your clean and safe crews, and put a few flower baskets, or not baskets, but barrels, a few flower barrels up. So we're seeing a variety of different interventions of that nature. And again, this is national. It's been popping up in cities all over the country.
One of the things that we're talking about a lot right now in downtown Cleveland, you touched on it in your presentation, is the return of office workers and sort of the role of the office. And you talked about it a little bit in the long term, and I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, because we're having both short-term and long-term conversations with a number of our downtown businesses about the role of the office in terms of the relative productivity of being together as opposed to looking at each other across a Zoom screen, and the relative collaboration and mental health benefits that occur, whether you're looking at each other from opposite sides of a computer screen or opposite sides of a conference table. And wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the trends that you see there in the mid to long term.
So I'll premise this by saying I think we have to be real careful about hyperbole or overreacting to a crisis. And I reflect back on 9/11, and in the weeks after 9/11, there were forecasts that no one would ever build another high rise, or the whole banking system would decentralize out of New York and move to Des Moines. And so we have to be careful not to overreact. Although I realize this, we've never encountered anything quite like this. So to your point, yes, we do think that as it's safe to return, that we will be back in the office. I think it's already difficult for people to be working on screens, and then add, if you've got school-age kids and you're, trying to help educate your kids, now you're a teacher, at home as well. So that's all going to pop back, to the way it was. At some point, kids are going to be back at school, and we're going to be back at work and freed up to do things. So one is just that space and that sort of natural tendency, as you mentioned, to we're social animals, for us to be together in places. The point, I'll reiterate the points I made too in our trends report. We do think teamwork, creativity, career advancement all require the chemistry of face-to-face interaction. And then there's so many professions and transactions that we do that are relationship based. And those relationships are based on far more than what you see on a screen or what you read on a piece of paper. So we do see, again, offices bouncing back, maybe not 5 days a week, every single week, but offices bouncing back. The last thing I'll say, and I actually got into a debate with a colleague of mine in Philadelphia recently, because he was, and I know this discussion's happening elsewhere. He was saying that co-working as a product was on its way out. People aren't going to want to get together in close quarters again. And he's a little older than I am. I was saying, well, baby boomers maybe are not going to do that, but younger people are going to immediately be back and are not going to be intimidated by lack of space. And I do think they're going to return to pre-pandemic work styles very quickly. And we're actually out here in Colorado, we're seeing the emergence, even in the pandemic, of co-work models in rural settings. So people that are temporarily escaping cities, or they're moving sort of in search of lifestyle, that's the type of office environment that they're looking for. So we're pretty confident that offices will remain. Pre-pandemic office products like co-working will remain. Yeah, there may be more options for more individual space, but we don't see this as the demise of office by any means.
Well, I'm going to ask kind of a flip side of that question, because on the one hand, we're all, by virtue of what we do, we're place-based thinkers. We're a place-based development organization. We believe in a place-based office culture and all the benefits that come with that. But we're also thinking about whether there are some opportunities for downtowns like Cleveland to attract remote workers from the coasts. We hear some anecdotal evidence already in Cleveland of young people, coming back to Cleveland, renting an apartment downtown, but continuing to work ostensibly in New York or Chicago or some other pricier place, but kind of living the big city lifestyle in Cleveland and working remotely. Is that a trend that you see on the horizon, and an opportunity for cities like Cleveland?
Yeah, that's a trend that was happening before the pandemic that we think is being accelerating. So there already was a flight from the costly coastal markets to the interior, and younger people seeking affordability, quality of life, also meaningful engagement in civic affairs, which is something that the Downtown Cleveland Alliance has, at least in my experience with you, has been tuned into that. How do we get young people involved in what we do downtown to improve downtown as an environment? So yeah, I think you'll continue to see that. I do think Cleveland was being discovered, is being discovered, will continue to be discovered. And I do think this migration from pricey coastal markets, maybe more east than west for you, but you'll continue to be an attractive gateway. But again, I think you got to continue to do what you've been doing. You got to maintain some semblance of affordability. You need to be welcoming, inclusive, have the same values that the younger generations have. Arguably Cleveland does, but we have to retain that. We have to be, it's a bad word to some people, but you got to be progressive if you're going to get people under 40 engaged in your city.
Well, I think that's a nice segue, because one of the things you talked about in your presentation and in the report is the acceleration of the trend towards greater racial equity and inclusion. And Cleveland, like a lot of cities across the United States, has had its fair share of struggles with racial equity and inclusion. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of the ways in which you see downtown organizations being a constructive voice and evolving in light of everything that's going on right now.
Sure, I think there's both an opportunity and a responsibility of downtown organizations to bring the business perspective to a variety of equity conversations. So there are at least a couple angles that I think are immediate. One is in policy, just in terms of city policy. I know cities all over the country, city governments, mayors, are economic opportunity were key issues before the pandemic. This is only going to accelerate it because of the economic damage and the inequity and the economic damage. So can the business community be at the table and bring thought leadership and bring private sector expertise to different solutions? And these solutions may be in the realm of affordable housing, and maybe in the realm of workforce training, apprenticeship, linking residents to economic opportunities within a downtown. I think there's a variety of ways that a business community, a downtown organization can partner on a higher level with cities in that. And then the other thing I want to mention, I talked a little bit about in the presentation, but this whole storefront economy emphasis. There are really three areas that we're counseling that groups like the Downtown Cleveland Alliance exert energy in now moving forward. One is clean and safe. We got to make sure we take care of the basics of downtown, that it remains a clean and safe place. And you guys excel at that. One is this public space innovation. But the third one is storefront economy. And unfortunately, not all businesses are going to survive this. Those that do, it's great, and hopefully we can help strengthen them along the way. But if you had vacancies before, you'll have more vacancies on the other side of this, and also storefront vacancies. But that is opportunity. And I think that is opportunity to link with neighborhoods, to link with owners of color and a whole variety of different groups to look at opportunities for maybe adding an outlet downtown or business creation in downtown. And it's not just ground floor. I mean, that goes into office pursuits and professional pursuits as well. So I do think that this recovery period, if handled right, really could be a bridge building way and to better, from an economic standpoint, better connect downtown with neighborhoods and the city at large.
Before we turn it over to Lauren and check in on whether we've got some questions coming in from the audience, Brad, one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I think it came up in the report, but not as much in the presentation, the importance of arts and culture to downtowns, and very big in downtown Cleveland with Playhouse Square. And this is an extraordinarily challenging time for the arts. And, wondered if you could talk a little bit about not what you see in terms of a trend on the other side, but any insights you can share, from downtowns that you're talking to across the country that are helping their arts organizations navigate this.
Yeah, arts and culture organizations. And this is close to home. My youngest son is in the music business, in the entertainment business. So, that all just evaporated in March, and in some ways, maybe some of the last to come back on the other side of the pandemic. So having said that, I do think there are plenty of roles for arts and culture now. One is the storefront issue, in terms of interim activation of storefronts. Can we use those storefronts and pay artists, to exhibit and to hone their crafts in there? One, and I'm seeing this in cities all over the country, but in terms of expression, in terms of just collective social expression related to the protests for racial injustice, but also other challenges in our community, can we start to see that in terms of murals and in terms of expressions of public art? And in some ways, can the downtown support this and support artists in that pursuit? And also helping arts and culture people. Some cities have been more aggressive than others on this, but just with interim jobs, interim things to do. I know I've, again, back in Denver, there's been some integration of arts and culture with mental health, and arts and culture people, working with mental health people to help just in basic therapies and helping people express themselves in what is a very challenging time for a lot of people. So, so I think that's some interim roles for arts and culture. And then, man, when we're finally vaccinated, there's just gonna be a surge of pent up demand. People hungering to go back to the theater, to the movie house, to the nightclub, all these different pursuits. So can we prepare for that? I mean, that's part of this storefront economy thing, is how do we prepare for a surge in entrepreneurship and a regeneration of the arts and music and culture. The last thing I'll say is I think this regeneration of arts, culture, and music, and I think of this again because my kid's so close to it, rarely in our lifetime, hopefully never again, is a whole industry just going to evaporate and then have to reinvent itself. But I think that's going to happen, particularly on the grassroots scale with arts, music, and culture. So in this regeneration, can we do it better? Can we make it more inclusive? Can we showcase different elements of our community? Can we be more inclusive of different cultures and different types of expression? I hope folks are having this conversation in Cleveland.
Well, I'll put in a plug here for our Voices of Cle public mural program, where we've been working with artists of color, primarily Black artists, really since June, to animate downtown with public murals. There's a terrific display right now in the heart of Playhouse Square that we encourage folks to come down and check out. And a perfect opportunity to do that is Restaurant Week in downtown Cleveland next week, which kicks off on Monday, September 28th, and will run through October 4th. We have well over 120 restaurants and bars that are open, and it's a great time to come down, support your favorites, try out some of the new places that have opened over the course of the summer. We've had at least 8 restaurants open in the last 2 months. So there's some new places to try out and some terrific public art to check out while you're downtown as well. With that as a transition, Lauren, why don't we turn to you and see if we have any questions from the audience for Brad?
First question, is there any indication of what kind of entrepreneurship will emerge during this time? For example, will we see more makers or small businesses offering services?
My response is all the above. I'm really pretty optimistic on the next wave of entrepreneurship. Now, on one level, back to storefront economy. This recession, I characterize it almost as an upside down recession, because in past recessions, professionals, manufacturing, other sort of high earners got hammered, and the restaurants, the service businesses, the retail, found a way to maneuver through it. This time it's totally the other way around. You've got more pain now with these smaller businesses. And because of that, I think these smaller businesses will regenerate much more quickly. Also because a lot of the professional class, for better or worse, is retaining a lot of its income right now. So I think there's an opportunity for demand for restaurants, for small, unique, experiential boutiques and retail. Music, arts, and culture, that could regenerate very quickly and create a lot of alternatives. You're still seeing innovation in other realms, more office type realms. You're seeing innovation right now in tech and distribution, supply chains. I am completely intrigued at what will happen to supply chains. We have found so many supply chains broken right now because we're relying on international production, and there may be some localized opportunities to create new supply chains locally, and that could be fascinating. I remember the Evergreen initiative in Cleveland with the Cleveland Foundation and some others, and how that was really creating new enterprises locally to help supply some of the larger businesses. I think it's going to be fascinating about supply chain options too, and there may be some research now that could help seed some new businesses related to that. So again, I know this time it's such a troubling time, and one of the benefits I have in what I do, I'm able to sort of not be on the ground, I can sort of stand back a little bit and try to look at this bigger picture. And I really do see a lot of opportunity once we get to that recovery and regeneration phase. And as I said earlier, really the opportunity to maybe do some things differently, and hopefully better.
Second question, how can businesses work better with communities to establish themselves as allies in terms of social justice and avoid being targets of civil unrest?
That's a tough question. I don't know if I'm the right guy to be asking that. But I do think, well, I'll just go ahead and say this, and then you guys can turn it off if I offend anyone. But I think a lot of what's happened this summer is really an awakening for white people more than anything else, and for white people to really understand what Black people, what people of color have been dealing with for forever. And one, I hope that sticks, because it's important for us to get a sense of that. And then two, to me, this is about how we run our businesses and through our actions. So are we going to be more intentional about meaningful opportunities for people of color? Are we going to be intentional about who we buy stuff from, who we hire, who we train? So to me, this is not about sending some, email statement about a commitment that may be good or maybe hollow. It's really about individual businesses taking action and being deliberately inclusive and helping folks along. I mean, this is such a huge challenge in this country. And man, we're going through a reckoning right now. So let's, again, as an old white guy, it's time to do stuff, and it's time to do it through actions.
Third question was about, can we share the report and the PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
Right.
I'll leave it up to Downtown Cleveland Alliance on how to distribute it, but the slides are theirs. The whole Global Trends report, the whole series is available on our website, and I'm looking at Michael and Lauren, and it looks like they can provide a link, I assume, to everybody who's signed up or on your website.
Yeah, sure
we can
thing.
probably just drop a link in the chat, and we'll distribute it via our social media, and if we can get it out to folks who registered, we'll do that too.
Yes.
We probably have time, Lauren, for one more question from the audience.
I think that was it, but if Brad wanted to address anything else that he wanted to talk about, he's more than welcome to do so.
Closing remarks, Brad?
Just thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Again, what I'm talking about, I don't know if I'm getting it completely right. It's really our best guess. And early on, back March, April, May, things were changing weekly. We didn't know what was going on. I do think there's a little more predictability now the longer we're in this thing. I do think we're in for another 6, 9, 12 months of rough sledding. But I hope if you haven't had the opportunity to think long term and think about the other side of the pandemic, I hope this report and this discussion gives you some hope, because I do think there's it's cliche, there's light. Out of darkness comes light, and I do think that there's light, and hopefully it's bright. And I'll just leave it there.
Well, Brad, we really thank you for your time and your longtime support of the Alliance and the work that we're doing in downtown Cleveland. Can't wait for the day when we can welcome you back here in person and tour you through things. And welcome you in person for the next restaurant week that we have in downtown Cleveland. Just a reminder to everybody, we are kicking off a special fall downtown restaurant week starting Monday. Please come downtown and check it out. We have all the details on our website at downtowncleveland.com. And we'll be back next week for another episode of the Downtown Now webinar. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you, Lauren, for your help today. And once again, Brad, thank you for being our guest.
Great. Thank you. Go
Bye-bye.
Browns.
Thank you.